very flat, pretty open, but the lake drops away about 6 to 8 feet, pretty steep down to the edge of the water, and it's shallow for a long way. And so I walk over to the edge, probably about 40 feet away from the campground. I walk over the edge, and it is blue sky, sun's already set, about 10:30 at night, full moon out, and it's shining on the lake, and the lake is just glowing white. You can see everything everywhere. It's so clear up there. And I walk over the edge of the lake, and the first thing I see is my boat out in the lake, and the anchor rope's tight, and it's tied to the stump right in front of me, about 6 feet up off the ground. And everything looked good, and I started to turn, and when I did, something caught me out of my left eye. I looked down, and somebody had parked an aluminum boat right underneath my anchor rope and tied off to the same stump that I was tied off to. The reason they did that, there was a flat rock out in the water, and they would use that rock to get in and out of their boat with. And as I turned and looked, there was somebody standing on the flat rock. So I was on the bank up here, and the lake would be out here below me. They were standing on this flat rock, and they had their left hand on the front of this little aluminum boat. With the right hand, they were bent over, digging around inside this boat. And as I turned, I thought, I guess I'm not the last person. Somebody else has forgot something out of their boat, and they're down here to get it. I thought it was kind of odd because it was so late at night. But as soon as I was turning away, they turned and looked up at me, looked back down the bottom of the boat, stepped backwards off the rock onto the shoreline, and crouched down low and put their arms across their knees. And I thought real quick, like, hey, maybe this is somebody, you can walk along the shoreline, nobody'd ever know you're there. You could not see them from the campground. They're walking from boat to boat, looking at people's stuff, looking for valuables. And I thought, you know, I just caught somebody trying to rip somebody's stuff off out of this boat. And I thought, you know, I almost went over and said, hey buddy, what are you doing? At the most, I'm 15 feet away from you, just right here in front of me, down on the edge of the water. And as it's crouched down and it's looking to the left and to the right, to the left and right, mind you, the moon is shining down, and I can see clearly this dark object or person with the white lake in the background. There was no mistake what you would be looking at. A person, you could tell if it was a bear, a deer, an elk. You could tell. This thing, like as it was crouching, it was standing there looking right or left, deciding on what to do. It stood up and quarter turned and looked right up at me, and we were locked eyes. You know, a lot of people say, you know, wow, it seemed like forever, but it's only a couple seconds. I can tell you we were staring eye to eye for at least a solid 10 seconds. I could see the moon shining off of its face, because when it turned and looked at me, it was reflecting off of its face. You could see the oil on the skin across the cheeks and the nose and the lips and a little bit of the forehead. You could see, the first thing I see is the domed, taller head. That just instantly told you this is not a bear. Bears don't have that domed head. They have a big snout. You can see the face. There was no snout on this thing. It didn't have huge shoulders and long arms. It would just look like me standing there looking just like this. It blinked 4 or 5 times staring at me. I could see the eyes, the reflection off the eyes. And mind you, it's reflection. You can see the moonlight on the eyes as it's staring at you. And it's blinking 4 or 5 times. As we're locked eyes, it looks down towards Newberry Peak and the outside of the campground, which we were kind of camped towards the bay use area. We stood there for 10 seconds looking at each other. It glanced down towards the end of the campground, looked back up at me, and turned and started to run away down the shoreline. It took 4 steps to get down on all 4s. And as it went, each step it took, it got lower and lower to the ground. It took its hands, it was cupping its hands and pulling the dirt on the sides of its legs as it ran. It didn't make any sound, didn't make any noise until it was down on all 4s. It would take that sand and cup it and throw it behind it, so that if you were to chase after it, you'd get blasted in the face with all the sand or gravel and debris. You could hear it landing in the lake as it ran down the shoreline. When it got down on all fours and started running, it started breathing much harder. And I've tried this, when you bend over like that, you can feel pressure on your lungs. You can hear this thing sucking in air and then blowing it out real hard. As it ran and built up momentum running down the shoreline. It probably went about 30 feet on all fours, and there were some larger rocks about that tall up on the edge of the shoreline, and just ahead of it was a tree that had eroded off the embankment and fallen into the lake. As it ran through the rocks, it picked up its hands and put it on top of the rocks, not even lifting up, just raising its arms as to use it as a balance as it ran. When it got to that tree, it put its left hand on top of the tree and swung both legs and feet and hopped cleanly over the top of this thing. It had branches on it. It would have made it difficult for anybody to climb over this thing. It put its hand on there. One swift motion was over the other side and continued running down the shoreline. I did not move because I was in such awe of what I was looking at. But at the same time, I'm still trying to figure out what the hell this thing is. You know, I haven't put together anything other than evaluate what it's doing. I watched it run all the way out of the campground to a flat area where there was a day use area. It's a really sandy beach and some taller trees. It's pretty flat. It ran at least 250 yards down the shoreline, and I'm watching this dark object on the white ground as it's running. It almost comes to a stop, still on all fours. It stands up in the moonlight, plain as day. Quarter turns again, looks back at where it had just come from, and I'm not going to say it's looking at me, but it's looking in my direction. Took a quick glance, looked up in the trees, and walked straight ahead, going right straight into the tree. It didn't have very far to go. It only took a couple of steps, and it disappeared within the tree. We had a camcorder sitting on the picnic table, and the first thing I thought was, I got to know what this thing is. As soon as it went in the trees, I ran to the picnic table. I grabbed the old camcorder, opened up the back of the motorhome, grabbed the mag light, and I took off running as fast as I could to the campground. And I know you're thinking, what's he chasing after this thing? I don't know what it is. I'm trying to process and figure this out in my mind. What is this thing? I know what I saw, but it doesn't make any sense. This thing's already run 200 yards down the shoreline, and it's only got maybe 80 yards to cross the road into the campground, and I have to go the 200 yards. And I know in my mind, I'm not going to outrun it, and as fast as it moved, nobody's going to outrun this thing. I've never seen anything move that fast on fours on the ground like that, trying to get away from somebody. Elk, maybe. This thing, you will not outrun it. But I'm running down the road, and as I'm running, I turn on the flashlight, and I turn on the camcorder, and so it's already, I get into the tree line where I think it's crossing this road, or already has crossed, and I started videotaping in a circle with a flashlight. I made one complete turn, and I really realized just how dark it was within the trees where the moon was not penetrating, and I got this overwhelming feeling of, what am I doing here? And so, I won't say I ran, but I carefully watched my exit as I left. I went back to the campground and I sat on the picnic table with my hand, just thinking about all the stuff that had happened. You know, I'm like, okay, it was a bear. It was a bear. And as I'm sitting there thinking, I have never seen a bear step backwards and put its arms on its hind legs, crouch down like that. And when it looked right at me, you could see, like I said, the oil across his face and his nose and his eyes kind of back in his head a little ways, the cheeks protruded so much. There was no sound, you know? It didn't have long arms. Yeah, the sound that it made as it took off, you know, I've heard bears growl, stuff like that, but it didn't sound like it was a growl. It sounded like it was just trying to breathe and leave. But when it ran on all fours down the end of the campground, stand up and turn, and then just walk off in the trees like this, that's no bear. And I still see it